Today, we are going to talk about the Decalogue. So, the Decalogue is a very fancy name for the Ten Commandments, which I'm sure you've all heard about. Um, and when we listen or when we have this particular lecture, we need to try as best as possible to be ubicated, to be in the moment, because some of the things we say about the Decalogue are quite um, powerful in terms of the content and what we're going to touch on today in this particular talk. So let's make a start. Um, we have said that all the great religions and teachings contain the golden thread of Gnosis. We talked about that at the beginning. We have mentioned in general chat and conversation about ancient Egypt, ancient Mexico, even ancient Jerusalem. We talked about Judaism. We talked about the Kabbalah, Quran, etc., etc. And we also know that there are many teachings in the Bible which are there to awaken and guide people um, towards their spiritual development. But unfortunately, the Bible has been distorted or changed, or maybe we could even say manipulated over the years by various rulers, kings, and other religious type persons because they want to have the Bible their way so they can gain the ultimate power that they want at that time. So most at the moment, a lot of Bibles in English are the King James Bible version. But of course, that's his version. So there's other versions which existed before and since. And this means that the true understanding of the Bible has been, in some cases, lost because the Bible is read, in inverted commas, unconsciously. In other words, you could say mechanically, and sometimes it's read uh, in a way which is very kind of dry and what we would call, if you remember some lectures back, we talked about the doctrine of the eye, as in the eye which we see through, because just reading and taking things literally is not enough when it comes to the esoteric work. We need to have the doctrine of the heart, which relates to the consciousness. Now, as we know, this course is related to self-knowledge and is really just an introduction to Gnosis and how we can achieve and find our own Gnosis. And therefore, this course is for people who want to move on that vertical path we talked about last week when we were saying if we want to increase our level of being, our spiritual development moves along that vertical path. And the person who wants to move on that vertical direction would be somebody who's longing for radical change. And remember, we use that phrase, radical change, because it's what Master Samuel talks about, what we need to do, change ourselves, change our psyche, our false personality, our egoic attitude to life. So this lecture is talking about the uh, concise meanings of the Ten Commandments, which were written, as we've already said, to aid the investigator, to aid or help the searcher. It's a set of instructions and orientations that, if they are followed correctly, will allow the person to move in that vertical path. And we can say, as an introduction to that, that vertical path is the same as the initiatic path. The initiatic path is an esoteric journey which each one of us can take if we so choose to. So it's not superficial. It's a real path, a real thing. And in this case, the Ten Commandments, as you know, were given to us by Moses. all those years ago, or rather, God gave them to Moses to give to us, which means in terms of this talk, it's important to continue to establish and maintain our link with our inner being. And if you remember, we draw or represent our inner being in this way. We've done this before. The inner being is manifest or comes to sort of express through the heart, which is what's shown there with the yellow inside the heart. So if we look at these 10 commandments, the first one, to love one's fellow man as oneself, to love God above all and one's fellow man as oneself. What does this really mean? If we start to look at our psychology and the way we operate through the aspects of the observer and the observed, or the key soul, or any aspects like that, we start to see the egos manifest or try to manifest in any particular moment as a reaction to the situations in which we find ourselves during our life. And we know that any particular ego, whether it's to do with anger or to do with lust or to do with jealousy, whatever it may be, is really in it for itself. It's not there to share or give love to anybody else. In fact, we can say quite a lot of the time, we don't love. As humans, we don't love. Okay. We may love ourselves, but do we love our fellow men as ourselves or our fellow women? And that means to be able to love, we need to have the understanding of how to love and what love actually is. When we hear about in the Bible the term the tithe, take the tithe from the person, or God will take the tithe, that is, you can say, in relation to the way in which we could share what we have in terms of sharing food or sharing medicine or being charitable or helping others in whichever way. And in that way, we're starting to love other people. That sacrifice for humanity, if you remember that third factor of the revolution of the consciousness. But we need to be able to approach God, our own God, and to be able to do that, to be able to reach and find our own God, we need to do the will of our Father. And again, we'll come back on to this a bit later on. But if you remember in the Kabbalah, the image we showed a few weeks back, and it's in the WhatsApp group, the Kether is the Father, and our inner Father is Chesed, the blue circle number 4, if you remember from that image. We'll come back to it later. So we need to go to God, and to do that, we need to do the will of the Father. If we are identified in any particular moment, then in that moment, that's all that matters, whether we're identified with cake, or we're identified with football, or we're identified with missing the bus, or not being able to get to the airport because the train lines are broken. That's where our focus is, rather than God. So how can we love God if we are identified? And what is this God? Well, God is, we can say, our inner being, who we've talked about before. And we know that everybody has an inner being, whether they know it or not. So therefore, God is in everyone. And so if we love God, we should love everybody. It's a very simplistic thing to say, but a very hard thing to do as we go through our daily life. And we can say, if we love God, why don't we self-remember? Remember that practice of self-remembrance? Why don't we do that? Why don't we do self-observation all the time? It's because we have a great big pile of egos inside our psychology. So the first commandment, is fundamental. And we all go, yeah, I love God, I love God. But actually, do we love God? Because we have all these things in the way called egos. We have a lot of psychology which we have to work through. And it shows that we are works in progress, that we are developing along that vertical path as we're able to become more connected to God. But if we're honest with ourselves, we see that quite often we are identified or fascinated and we are not connected or doing the will of our God or our Father within us. So I'm going to move quite quickly because of time. The second commandment, don't say or take the Lord's name in vain. Well, what does this mean? We know, again, from previous lectures, previous talks, that the word, W-O-R-D, is sacred. Why do we say it's sacred? It's because we create with the word. So we know in the Bible, I think it's in Genesis, it says, in the beginning there was the word, and the word was this, that, and the other. But the word is sacred. We can create. And that's why we do vocalizations. That's why we do mantra, because we're creating something through the pronunciation of that particular sound. Which means if we say or take the Lord's name in vain, what are we doing? Well, we're allowing an egoic state to manifest through what we are creating with, i.e., our voice box, our larynx. And we spend a lot of time as humans, as humanity in general, trying to twist and cheat with words to give some kind of justification or manner that we have just spoken about, some kind of reality. We kind of twist things to make we're always right. And we're always basing it on the fact that we want to be the center of attention. This comes back to the false personality, which we talked about a little bit a few weeks ago. We are false, we can say, because as well as those ways of taking the Lord's name in vain, we also say, oh my God, for example, quite often in a negative context, not as in an adoration. We do it as was it OMG in our text messages or on social media. And it becomes a vanity because we just say it because we just say it. Oh my goodness, we must eradicate these sorts of egos from within. We must take away the opportunity they have of manifesting and taking the God's name or the Lord's name in vain. On the other side of the coin, people say, well, I go to church, and when I'm in church, I pray. But when they're in church and they pray, they're doing it very kind of proudly. There's a lot of vanity and pride mixed up in their praying. They go because they want to tick the boxes. They go to church because they want to look good in front of the local mayor or the local friends or the group of people that are in that church at that time. And again, if we're honest with ourselves as students of Gnosis, we do have those egos within us. We start to observe them and come to the conclusion that, yes, I do say things in vain. And what God is saying to us through the Ten Commandments is we've got to stop doing this. We've got to start awakening consciousness so that what we say actually matters. Because fighting with other people, arguing with other people, all it does is generate a negative vibration. Often you may have walked into a room after there's been an argument between two people and they're not there, but we can feel a tension in the room as we walk in. That's because they've changed the vibration of the place they were in. So when we look at this particular commandment, we need to start to look at it in an honest way from our point of view. Also, another example might be when we go, people go to do jury service, or they go to, oh, I swear on, in the name of God, I'm going to say the truth and nothing but the truth and all that. Well, are we doing that? Are we really saying the truth? Or are we actually pretending or thinking we're saying the truth, not actually saying the truth because of our false personality and the way we operate? So that was the second of the commandments. The third one is not going to come unless I press the right button. There we go. Sanctify the holy days. Now, just to say before we go on, these what I'm putting on the screen now, these versions of the Ten Commandments, I know there is many versions of the Ten Commandments, and all I've done is taken them very kind of succinctly. I haven't necessarily copied any particular version from any particular Bible. I'm just giving the gist in terms of what it's about, so we can look at the esoteric meaning behind them. So sanctify the holy days. Well, if we look in society, look at our society in the West in particular, we see that on the holy days, people have a great party. They go out and celebrate Christmas Day, Easter Sunday, whatever. They have a great time, go to the pub, go with their friends, have a family, this, that, and the other. Rather than sanctifying the day in a sort of esoteric manner, they celebrate the day in other ways. We need to remember, as students of Gnosis, that within the temple of the body, which is our physical body, is the altar of the heart. And that is where we must sanctify every day. We must, in our conscious imagination, kneel down before our Divine Mother in our heart at the altar, or in our heart temple, you could say, and talk to our Divine Mother, talk to our Inner Father spontaneously. Pray, yes. Make petitions, yes, but make them in the moment, make them real, not rehearsed speeches. We need to be able to sanctify in a genuine way. We need to give ourselves time every day to be able to adore and come in contact with, through the connection, our own inner being, our own God. And yes, it's a celebration, but it's not in the same way as drinking lots of champagne or lots of eating lots of chocolate, etc. We need to try to be in the moment so that we can have that connection with our being at all times. That would give us holy days of the soul, okay? When we are praying or connected to or petitioning our Divine Mother or Inner Father. And you could say ultimately this leads us back to the inner state of ubication, which we've talked about a few times in the course so far. Ubication is where we place ourselves in alignment in the moment with our inner being. So we can feel the presence of our inner being, our Divine Mother or Inner Father, in any moment, so that we can be at one, at peace. We can feel the serenity, and we can feel and understand the silence, the wisdom of silence. All right. So I'm going to carry on a bit now. Move to the next slide. So the fourth commandment, honor thy father and thy mother. And thy means your, doesn't it? So from an esoteric point of view, as students of Gnosis, what's the best way to honor our father? It is to eliminate defects, eliminate egos, okay? And to tell the truth, not to lie, okay? Because lying, if you think back to what we said earlier on about the word and the creation, the lie is very potent in terms of negativity. And if we're creating something which is very negative, all we're doing is moving farther away from our father, or further away from our father, rather than eliminating egos, moving up that vertical ladder, that vertical path, to get closer to our in a father. So to honor our father, we eliminate defects and tell the truth. And I'll put a summary up later. Don't worry. Okay. To honor our mother, we need to be chaste in thoughts and words and deeds. Okay. And what does the word chaste mean nowadays? When we say chaste, we're not talking about monks and nuns. When we say chaste, we are talking about the management of our energies, the scientific management of our energies. Okay. It requires us to manage what we are doing in our thoughts, in our words, and in our actions. Okay. So to honor thy mother or our mother, chaste in thoughts and words. In other words, we need to be pure. And in this case, the mother, the representation of the mother is Kundalini, as we've said before, Divai Kundalini. So we need to have love in our heart to be able to honor our father and our mother, love for humanity. And as I've mentioned, we need to eliminate our dear ego. The ego we love so much, we need to eliminate. The ego which takes us away the most from being in the moment, or the ego which makes us lose the most energy in any particular moment, whether it's anger, whether it's pride, whether it's lust or jealousy, whatever. We need to eliminate that with the help of our Divine Mother. And that means we need to understand that some people are very proud. They have within them the ego of pride so much that they don't look down. They don't look down. There is no humility within them. They don't look downwards because they think they are so high up. Okay? They are led to believe they're okay, that they're redeemed without doing any work on themselves, without honoring their inner mother or their inner father. Okay? So there's quite a strong one in terms of where we are as students of Gnosis. Okay. I'm just trying to turn my pages over. Here we go. So the next commandment, thou shalt not kill. You shall not kill. Okay. To kill is the second crime in the human species. The second crime was when Cain killed Abel. I'm sure most of you know this. We know the first crime of humanity was committed by Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve were not one man or one woman. They were a whole generation of people. For Cain and Abel, Abel is a representation of the being, our innermost, our intimate, that part within. And Cain is the representation of the ego. So we know in the biblical story that Cain killed Abel with the jawbone of a mule. The mule is a symbol of the mind. The mule or the donkey is a symbol of the mind. So basically, the intellectual part killed the conscious part. In other words, identification, fascination, made all those energies which the person, or in this case, the two, I think they were brothers, Cain and Abel, weren't they? They lost or that energy was lost in that moment. But at the same time, we need to understand and appreciate, as students of Gnosis, that people in general, you could even include us in that, kill in many ways. It's not just the knife or the bullet or the poison. It's also in the betrayal, in the scorn, in stealing a person's honor, we can say. Okay? We can kill through or via our thoughts and feelings and actions. If we start to look at ourselves as a humanity, we can see that we kill animals, plants, there is abortions, there is genetic modification, there is basically all those things which are violence against nature. Yeah, okay, we need to kill an animal to eat if we're starving, but in general terms, as students of Gnosis, it's better to let the butcher kill the animal because of the associated cause and effect. And that cause and effect we would call karma and dharma, which we're going to come on to in another talk in future weeks. Okay, I'm moving on again. Um, do not fornicate, do not adulterate. This, as far as this school is concerned, is the version as it was given on the tablets. Okay? Other schools, other religions took away the first part, do not fornicate, and just put do not adulterate. But we need to consider the importance of the energy. When we talk about fornication, and in the word fornication, we are talking about spilling or wasting energies. And of course, fundamentally, that fornication is related to the sex and the sexual energies. But the fornication actually also occurs every time we are identified with any particular ego. That ego is using energy from the human machine, and we are fornicating. In other words, spilling or losing that energy in those moments. So it's not just what happens in the bedroom, it's what happens throughout the whole of our daily life, unless we are in the moment. When we talk about fornication, we are often led to the description of what transformation and transmutation of energy is about. Okay, so we need now to have, if you don't mind me saying, a level of consciousness. We need to be in this moment listening and watching, because it's very easy for the mind to react to what we're going to talk about. So let's move to this transformation and transmutation, which is, you could say, an antidote to the fornication. We know in our daily life that, very simply, in terms of transformation of energy, food, light, and sound comes into us. Okay, the input. There's also air, and we'll come on to that in a moment. And then in this transformational process, that gets turned into electrical signals, chemicals, as you can see. And then the output is motion, kinetic energy, waste, chemical, sound is sound, and heat is thermal. So it's a very simple way of talking about transformation. But you'll recognize this sort of picture. This is what we're looking for as students of Gnosis. How to manage energy within us, in particular the sexual energy, so that the Kundalini, the serpent of fire, can rise up the spine, instigating the movement and awakening of all the chakras. I'm sure you've all heard about this before, and this is sort of typical picture of what we see online when we look for these things. I think it was last week or maybe the week before, it was mentioned that we consume the four elements of nature through what we eat and breathe. So you have the earth, the water, the fire, and the air, and their chemical alchemical symbols are earth, water, fire, air. Okay. And we also consume impressions through the seven senses. So when we talk about the impressions, you remember what we said a few weeks back, that what we touch, what we smell, what we hear, they're all impressions. They're coming into us all the time. Okay. And when we say seven, so we've gone above the five sensory senses of our human machine, we also have the emotional and the intellectual inferior centers, which give us another sense, if you will. So all of those materials, in inverted commas, are consumed by each one of us consistently, and they are transformed into energy and distributed about the human machine. And we talked about that a few weeks ago. That's fine. But from an alchemical point of view, we need to go further. So this transformation of the energy, it's considerable change in form, appearance, or character. So transformation, for an example, we have water. So water can be steam if it's hot, or it can be ice if it's cold. So we have steam, water, and ice. They are the same material, but in a different form or appearance or character. Okay? Whereas transmutation is changing something from one form of nature to another form of nature, or you could say one form of energy into another form of energy. In other words, we're going to consciously, consciously change or convert one form of energy into another. And this is called transmutation. Transmutation doesn't happen mechanically. Transmutation requires consciousness. Okay? Then we have this thing called sublimation. This is where we have transmutation, okay, where the energy is changed from one thing to another. For example, lead into gold or water into wine. But it is placed into a culturally higher level and stored like a battery. Okay, that requires consciousness and a practice to go with it, which we're going to talk about in a bit later on. Okay, so sublimation is an important part of the work we are trying to do. Then, as you all are all aware, alchemy, I'm sure you've all heard of alchemy, a form of transmutation where the energy is refined and used for the fabrication of internal bodies. What does this mean? So, you all know we have the physical body. We also have the vital body. The vital body is our aura. The vital body is the thing that's very related to the physical body. Gives us energy, revives us when we sleep. And then we have different bodies to go into different domains or different places. So when we go to the dream world, the astral domain, we have an astral body. Okay, all of us. But our astral body, more or less for most people, is filled up with egos. So the fabrication of refined energy helps us to clean and clear that rubbish in our astral body and produce, in alchemical terms, a body of fire. The body of fire is the astral body, which we use consciously in the astral world. Similarly, for the mental world, we have a mental body. We need to create or fabricate that mental body. Similarly, for the causal body. Okay. So as you can see, there is a process, and the alchemy itself, which is performed between the loving couple, okay, is the way in which they are able to create within themselves the internal bodies. And on top of that, in the alchemy itself, the couple have the power in that moment to eliminate any particular ego which they have previously comprehended with the help of their divine mother. So it's another level of the psychological death can be performed in the alchemy. All of these practices above, all the transformation, transmutation, sublimation, alchemy, require that the energy is not spilled. The sexual energy is not spilled. Okay? Everybody has the right to have pleasurable sex, but to spill the energies, to waste the energies, is not what we are trying to do. In this school, in Gnosis, we are transmuting the energy so that it cannot be used by ego. It is saved within in that sublimation part. And then there is this thing called mutation. So the energy that has been transmuted is mutated and stored, as you said, in the sublimation, but it's placed in a location where it cannot be used by egos. It cannot be taken by egos. In other words, that mutated, transmuted energy is like used, or the property of, the Divine Mother and the Inner Father, our inner being. So we're able to use that energy in practices such as meditation, astral projection, any practice we want. We can use that energy which has been mutated and stored, and it's not available for the egos. Okay, so all of this relates to the alchemy, and all of this relates to the sixth law on the Ten Commandments. Okay, so we're going to carry on a bit more with this. As you know, this is the classic picture on the right of the Kundalini rising up the spine and activating all the chakras positively. And the difference between this school and other schools is that the Kundalini, when it rises permanently based on the merits of the heart. And what are the merits of the heart? They are how the person is using the other factors. We cannot progress very far in this work with the Kundalini unless we are applying the death and the sacrifice. You know this. We need to balance all three factors of the revolution of the consciousness, and the Kundalini will not rise unless we're in a balanced condition. So we need to apply the death, the sacrifice, and the birth concurrently. But you can see here, Divi Kundalini on the top left. You can see in the middle, that's the caduceus of Mercury, which you've all probably seen, not to be mistaken with the one where it's half of, as one serpent rather than two, which you see on the sides of ambulances. If you look on an ambulance in England, you'll see that caduceus, but it's a different meaning. It's to do with the healing of the Venerable Master Aesculapios. You'll see that on the side of an ambulance next time you look at it. And in the bottom left, you see the classic picture of the chakras being activated within the person, and then they're using it in meditation. So that's fine and dandy. But what does it mean practically? Okay, the scientific management of the energies. Okay, so where we are now, see where it says do. Okay, really that's to do with the musical note, do. Okay, so in English, that would be if you think of Mary Poppins, do a dear, that's the note, do. Okay, and it goes in that octave, as you can see with the arrow, to the note C, S-I, C. Okay, and that is a normal process of transformation which happens within the person. So we eat food and it gets managed by our internal systems, and those energies are distributed, as we know, to all the inferior centers of the human machine, the intellectual center, the motor center, the instinctive center, etc., and in particular the sexual center. And that sexual center is where the note C is, the highest level of that particular octave, and that particular energy is the note C. And we give, this is a table coming up now with a lot of information, okay? We give the energy you can see in the second column. The energy is given different names. The H stands for hydrogen. So when we talk about hydrogen in esoteric chemistry, we are not talking about hydrogen, the gas. We're talking about the hydrogen as an energetic level or vibration. So as you can see, we've already talked about the astral and the mental and the causal bodies. You can see that they have more and more refined levels of hydrogen, 24, 12, 6, etc. Okay. We are physically in hydrogen 48, or the level, or the vibration of our physical body and vital body is hydrogen 48. So when we apply the transformation of energy, as you can see with the green text in the middle column, it says the body's processes, what we eat, breathe, and sense becomes energy. And we all appreciate that. We understand that. But as you can see, as we then go on across the table, you can see with the red text, we are going to move into transmutation, which requires consciousness. So where it says body on the left-hand column, you can see the yellow flash. That is supposed to be the flash of the consciousness, which is required to enable us to transmute our energies into what you can see there as HC12, hydrogen C12 with the red background. Okay, that is where the energy is transmuted and then sublimated into the heart. And that is what we're going to talk about in a moment in terms of a practice. On the yellow part, the right-hand column, you can see there, I'm just going to move my thing so I can see. It says alchemy, tantrism, a form of transmutation where the energies are refined. And I've already touched on that, but you can see that the HC12 is used by the couple in a way to, as we've already mentioned, help crystallize and create and fabricate the astral, the mental bodies, and etc., and to progress in the work in that way. Okay. Whereas the red text, the pranayama, which we're going to mention in a moment, is a practice we use in our everyday life as students of Gnosis. So it doesn't matter if we're a single or a couple, we would use this practice. Okay, so let's just find my next slide. Okay, so the mantra hum sa. Okay, this mantra is very important. This mantra ideally would be done every day. This mantra is the one which takes the energy from the sexual center and places it ultimately in the heart, okay, where it is sublimated. So the mantra Hamsa is a tool we use to sublimate our energies. So the ego cannot reach it or find it or get to it. But at the same time, we do not end up wasting the energy in any way. We actually manage that energy scientifically. I'm going to carry on before I go any further. The Egyptian pranayama, I am going to put this practice into the WhatsApp group because the Egyptian pranayama is a big practice, but it's about the same thing. It's the managing and then ultimate sublimation of the energies. Okay. So that will come in the WhatsApp group. I'm not going to go into detail now because we haven't got time. We definitely haven't got time. And then we also, at the same time, need to be daily doing meditation, prayer, making petitions to our Divine Mother, to our inner Father, to our inner being at all times. Okay, so I'm going to tell you the mantra Hamsa now, and then at the end, we'll do it again together. So the mantra Hamsa, the way we do it, we sit with our back straight, or we lay with our back straight, whatever's more comfortable, but our back is straight, okay? And we clench the sphincter, okay? We clench the sphincter at the base of the spine, a sphincter below the sex, okay? We clench that sphincter, put the heels together, okay? Then we, using our conscious imagination, imagine the energy, the sexual energy, rising up the spine, okay, over the top of our head to our mid-brow. And as it does this, we pronounce the mantra hum, but internally. We do not say it externally. We say it internally. Hum, but inside, okay? Imagining the energy. You could imagine it as fire. You can imagine it as golden steam. You can imagine it whatever you want coming up the spine, okay, to the mid-brow. All the energy is collected in the mid-brow. And then we pronounce the mantra sa aloud. Sa. And as we pronounce it, we allow that energy we place that energy onto our heart or into our heart. Okay. So it's not a wishy-washy sa, it's a hard sa like this. So it's hum internally. Sa. Okay. And we pronounce that a minimum 7 times. And we're going to do that later as a practice. Okay. Hopefully you've got that. We'll repeat it later, so don't worry if you missed a detail. We can come back to it. But I'm going to carry on with the main slideshow now. Continuing with the 10 Commandments and Moses. Thou shalt not steal. So here we are not just talking about stealing in terms of the material. Obviously stealing money like a bank robber or stealing some goodies from a shop or whatever we feel we want to steal. It's not just that. It's not just robbery. We also are talking about when we steal somebody else's honor, or we steal somebody's teaching, for example, or maybe we steal their dignity, or we steal their virtues. Okay. If we reflect, we see what we have inside us and what we actually have, which is not ours. And that's quite a lot. And how do we obtain all those things which are not us inside us? Well, maybe we stole them. So it's not just about the material. It's not just about making oneself the owner of something which does not correspond to us. it's about stealing other people's, you can say in very general terms, light. We are stealing their goodness, their values, their virtues or attributes. Okay, moving on again. Oh, that didn't work. Press the right button. Thou shalt not raise false testimony nor lie. Okay, so we've already touched upon it, the fact that he who lies goes against the Father. Remember, we talked about it in terms of how we honor the Father. We said eliminate ego and tell the truth, which means if we tell lies, then we are going against the Father, but also logically, we are going against that Holy Spirit, which we will talk about in a moment. And the Holy Spirit represents purity within us. We find ourselves, if we start to examine ourselves, when we talk about false testimony, how often perhaps we have deception within us, or maybe hypocrisy, or even we may justify the hypocrisy we've just seen within us, or we evade our responsibilities, or we give false witness to some situation or some person or some event because we think through our false personality that's the thing that other people want to hear from us, so we can maintain our social status and, you know, the group of friends we have. Maybe we will raise false testimony to ourselves because we believe we are perfect because of any particular group or types of egos we have within. We justify how good we are, how wonderful we are, because we're worth it, because we're the center of attention, because we are the ones who deserve this moment. And if we are raising false testimony or lying, we can say, as an unfolding of that, that we are going against the Christ who is the love. If you remember from a few slides ago, we talked about the love and the Christ, or the Son, S-O-N. And that brings us to treachery. And you know, in the Bible, in the New Testament, it talks a lot about the three traitors. The three traitors who exist within our psychology are Pilate, Judas, and Caiaphas. Caiaphas is related to ill will. Pilate is related to the mind, to the justification of whatever. And Judas is related to desire. So those three traitors are in some way, if we start to analyze inside ourselves, related to this particular commandment. If we go against the Father, we are lying. But yes, we need to be non-fanatical. Yes, there is an ego of Gnosis. If we start to see in ourselves, we believe, or it's very easy to believe, that if we behave in a certain way, the Gnostic way, then we are going to be saved. But actually, that is just another ego. Or we might look out the window and see those people on the street and say, oh, they're like that, but I'm not, because I'm a Gnostic student. I'm superior. I have all this knowledge. Well, in fact, all we are is egoic in that moment. So we need to start to really look at ourselves and think, well, if I don't lie, that's great. But sometimes if I decide to say a half truth, let's say that, So, for example, if someone is going to be, um, there's an extreme example, someone's going to be killed or a vigilante is going to get them. If we hide them and then we tell them we don't know where they are, then yeah, we're lying, but actually we've probably not done something as bad as if we let the vigilante find the person. Not a great example, but it's a bit extreme. I realize that. Okay. Number 9, thou shalt not desire your neighbor's wife. Well, obviously, on the outside, or the highest level of this, no man or woman have the right to over any other man or woman. Okay. We know and can see that this is very related to desire, to jealousy, and there's many abandonments and quarrels and divorces in society. We know that. But at the same time, if we see it says you shall not desire, that key word there, desire, if we desire, then we're going to fall into this trap. But what is the opposite to desire? Well, it's to love. If we love somebody, then we're not going to necessarily steal them or take them or create some kind of adulterous situation. And that means we can say that this particular commandment is related with, or more to related to the esoteric work that we are doing. It's to do with the tangible and intangible aspects of our life. You know, maybe we know that there's a Gnostic master and we desire to have the same powers as that master. So there's the jealousy in there, there's a desire in there. Okay. Number 10, thou shalt not covet your neighbor's property. Well, this is the other side of the same coin. We just talked about the esoteric side. Now, this is more to do with the coveting of other people's stuff, the material part. But at the same time, we know that covetousness causes people to be envious and hateful. And being envious and hateful of others and their situation leads us to become arrogant and proud. If we start to examine, we'll see this. And this in turn makes us withdraw from God. If we are arrogant and proud, we don't need God. We think we're superior. And that means we move away from God, which means we find ourselves back at the first commandment. Remember we said that the first commandment was that we love God above everything else and treat everyone as ourselves. Well, if we've moved away from God because of this commandment, number 10, then it just brings us back to the first one. So they're very interrelated. Okay, let's carry on. There it is. There's that picture. If we remember, it was very fuzzy, and I put it onto the group, so it was less fuzzy on the group. If you look at this Kabbalah, you can see the top 3 in the triangle, or the top, what we would call the logoic triangle, Chokmah, Ketha, and Binah. We can see that those, if you look at that triangle magnified, we have the Father, Osiris or Ketha, the Son, Aurus or Chokmah, and the Holy Spirit, Isis or Binah. So that's just a random, well, not random, but it's just examples of different titles or labels given to those 3 aspects of the divine in the tree of life. We can also, therefore, compare that to the 3 factors. We've already mentioned that the death is related to the Father through the Mother. Obviously, as we said last week, the Divine Mother helps us with the death But we, as we mentioned earlier, we honor our father with the psychological death. The birth is related to the Holy Spirit. Remember, we talked about that and the purity and the energetic aspect. And then the third part there, the sacrifice for humanity, is that love, the love of the Son, S-O-N, in other words, the Christ. Okay, which means, in summary, we can say, he who lies sins or goes against the Father who is truth. He who fornicates or sins goes against the Holy Spirit who is purity. And remember what we said about fornicate. Fornicate is to spill the energy, whether it's in the bedroom or whether it's in our daily life when we're identified with any particular ego, anger, hatred, jealousy, whatever, then those things are the way, when they manifest, are the way in which we lose energy. And then he who hates sins goes against the Son, who is the Christ, who is love. And I'm looking at the time, we've overrun a bit, sorry. There's those three factors, which you've seen this slide before, those three factors. And we've also talked about the way in which in our daily life, when you can observe the way in which the egos manifest through the human machine on the right-hand side there, and the practice of the observer and the observed. You can see why now it is vital to practice this, because it enables us to understand and see the ego in action. We can then ask our inner mother, represented by Mary, Isis, Divai Kundalini, etc., who is there to guide us on our spiritual path, to protect us in our inner work, and to eliminate egos through the psychological death. You know, you've seen this slide before, you know this. And then we have, as you already remember, probably, hopefully, we have the method by we applying the death in motion in any moment, and those two sparks of light are supposed to represent the moment. And then that whole practice we did a few weeks ago, the psychological death, and what we practiced it last week as a whole. Hopefully you're all doing this practice now at home from time to time. If you can do it every day, that's brilliant. Okay, but this practice is fundamental. So we have in this talk, in the Decalogue, we have the death. Here it is. We had the birth, which is the management of energy. We did a bit of that just now with the Kundalini, the energies, all the different things. And then we had the sacrifice for humanity, which was the third factor. We talked about the love and the Christ. So in this talk, we've touched on all three aspects. Okay, I'm going to end the show.